So pink. Well, hello, everybody, viewers and listeners. Welcome to Spilling the Spirituality with Hilary and Rev Rob. And I am Rev Rob Benashak. And I greet my co-host, Hilary Loewenstein. Hello.
Hello, cheers.
Cheers. Cheers. We're going to have to brand a special brand of spirituality. Don't you think?
Yeah, today I'm drinking herbal tea all the way from Banff.
Nice.
Yeah, and it is delicious from the Banff Tea Company.
And I've got my usual green tea, and I drink Paul Newman green tea just because it's actually like really inexpensive at the Giant. So
Mm,
who knew? Who knew?
it's all the same.
It is all the same. Probably. It is. So, spirituality, what are we spilling this week?
Yeah. So, okay, this has been an interesting, well, it's been an interesting week. And I put a reel out this week on enabling and how dangerous it is to enable. And of course, whenever I do my reels, it's usually because it touches me personally. And I am definitely a recovering enabler. I admit it. I'm still in it. I do better than I used to do, but I am definitely someone who deals with this all the time. Yeah.
Well, it's just because, I know you and I know that you just really love helping people and really enjoy seeing them have breakthroughs and becoming close to people in that way. So yeah, what are your reflections about this enabling? What have you come to conclusions about?
Yeah. So I wanted to bring up a story or a situation that I have gone through that you are really there for me for, because you can really offer insight on this.
Hmm.
So, as if you don't know, I'm a life coach and a spiritual teacher. And, I've been doing this for many years and I've never really been attached to a client. I know it's completely unhealthy, but there was once upon a time a client that moved me deeply. And he was so, distraught and hurting. And I sort of made it my life's mission to help him. And in the process, got to know him very well, perhaps too well. I also want to say that Rob and I, our connection is, we met at a spiritual church together. And this person was also,
Involved with, yeah.
there at that time. And so that's also how, Rob knows him. So I really, it's so embarrassing to even say this, but like, I really cross boundaries that a counselor shouldn't. And because I would see progress in him. He had so many hardships, and yet at the same time, he really wanted to heal. And he was a deep person, and I learned a lot from him. And so before long, he has my cell phone number. And then I stopped taking money from him because I felt like we were crossing a line. And I became more like his friend slash helper because it didn't feel right anymore to call myself his counselor. Um, but then he started texting me all hours of the night. And there came a point, I want to say this was like a 2-year experience. And there came a point where my husband was like, enough. Like, we would be out to dinner and I would get this text that would say something like, my brother's missing. I think he's dead, like a big bomb. And I would drop everything that I was doing. And it was almost like he knew, when he was doing that he would get my full attention. And it was very hard. I couldn't stop thinking about him day in, day out. I would tell my family all the time, I need to help him. He has no one. He's alone. He has no one. And it really got to the point where he was somewhat abusive to me with his expectations. And he didn't like when I started to pull away because I needed to pull away from my own mental health. And Yeah, when you're in the middle of that, you feel like you're doing the right thing and everything. And then later on, it's only like, it's been, I think, has it been 5 years, maybe?
Something like that. Well, since we were all kind of hanging out, yeah, it was, yes, 2017. So yes, 5 years.
Yeah. So since then, like it took me, I'm not kidding, at least a year, if not longer, after cutting off contact with him, which ultimately I had to do to save my marriage, to save, myself. But I was in this like cloud for so long of thinking I was doing the right thing that it was only after I really got space and walked away from it where I started to really see, oh my gosh, this was really unhealthy. This was really off balance. And now I know, but I guess I wanted to bring this example up because I feel like many of you might be going through that too. When you're enabling, whether it's your spouse, your friend, a client,
Kids.
children, you don't realize how much you're doing it. And the people around you are trying to tell you, but you don't necessarily hear it. So what are your thoughts on my story, Rob?
Well, I think, a couple of things. I remember when we were having the conversation, and I remember for me, the first red flag was when you had said that he would text you during, the times that you had indicated in some way that, you were there with your family. So, I mean, it's you were always available to him, but you did, state that there were times that you would prefer not to be, engaged, and yet he still kind of crossed those boundaries, like at the dinner table, like, you'd be making dinner or you'd be sitting down to dinner, and here comes that text with that, with that emergency that he says he had. And then it began to feel strange. And then, realizing that he's sending you emails in this way as well, and really starting to lay pressure. And I think there are two things that are involved with you as the enabler. First of all, you sense somebody who is going through some sort of, issue or trauma, and you want to help, and you want to know that you are doing the thing to help this person move forward. So there is, I think there's this opportunity when you realize that these red flags are happening, uh, because now they're starting to affect you, to step back and see what your long game is. So if you are really there to help that person as a counselor, or even as a friend, then there's a point where you have given of yourself in a way that set precedent that's all that this person knows. So if you are there to fill that gap or to solve that issue from the beginning without ever then creating the opportunity for that person to develop solutions themselves, then the enabling part it becomes this codependent situation where that person really doesn't know any differently, because that's the dynamic that you set up. So I feel like that's the first transition part where enabling begins to happen, when your help to come up with solutions becomes your having the solutions each and every time to whatever an issue is. And then I think there's just so then you've got the boundaries issue, where not only are you the solution provider for this situation, but now you're providing those solutions at, in appropriate times, or times that you've indicated were, your time off limits. So you kind of had two things going on at once, and stepping back and asking yourself, if I want this person to grow that I'm connected with, what is best for that person? And it probably at first is not going to be your continued, uh, you know, interaction and problem solving. And then setting the boundary to say, well, I've got to, a lot of times when we let those boundaries be crossed, it's hard to get them back. So, I do see kind of two concurrent but significant issues happening in that situation, where at some point you've got to let the person that you're working with handle those problems on their own. And uh, then at another point, you also have to realize that you have to take a step back. And when you tell friends like me of this issue, then I then become involved in this process of, anytime that I am not being honest with you about my own red flags. Am I enabling you to continue with this behavior? So there's that, when you're close with somebody, when do you take that step to say, look, I don't think this is working out for you. And if you need help from me, helping to release from him, then that's it has a spider web effect, I think, on people around you.
And at the time when, I remember exactly when we had a sit down about this, and you were, trying to tell me like, okay, this is like, you're going way too far. But at the time when you're in the process of enabling somebody, which you think you're helping them, you can't see the forest through the trees. I remember when you were telling me this stuff, I was thinking in my head, yeah, but you don't understand. Yeah, but, he might hurt himself if I don't help him.
Right. Right.
Yeah, but he has no one else. Like all the yeah buts like coming in my mind. And I think with enabling, it takes two people to play that game.
Yes.
And I think that the person that is requiring someone to help them all the time, can often be a bit narcissistic. Um, uh, you know, just thinks that they deserve this constant attention, and people like me fall prey to that on from a beautiful level. I'm very empathetic, I'm a very compassionate person, and I think that people who enable are generally pretty sensitive people. But I was thinking about this, and I wanted to bring it up to you, is that I was thinking about this week, that really enabling is also a form of control. It was when he was happy, I felt successful. When he made a big stride forward, I thought, well, I did that. Well, I
Right.
helped him
Right.
do that. And also, somebody like me, I'm a super sensitive being. I'm sure probably everyone who's watching is, a lot of us light workers, we are naturally that way. Um, I felt, I felt sorry for him. And, so on one level, it's like people like us are very compassionate. But then on the other level, perhaps there's control there, being, I feel like I'm uncomfortable sometimes in people's deep discomfort. Like I feel, like energetically, I feel very,
Let's make this better. I
let's
want
make
you to
this
feel
better
better.
right
Right.
now,
Yeah.
right now, right now. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Can you
Yeah.
relate
And
to that?
well, and yes. And so, I think that's one of the reasons why, working with congregants as a minister or the pastor of a church is the same. It's a very similar situation where, of course you enjoy seeing someone,
Yeah.
have an issue and work through it on their own and work through it themselves. Um, it's funny you mentioned the control though, because in the end, you got to ask in your situation, who had the real control when, when all of those things that I think he got to learn about you were able to be exploited, because he did understand you. He was a very intuitive person. He did, understand your all of those wonderful things that you share with other people, and was able to kind of, know what you were thinking as you would be making these decisions. So, yeah, I think it's a challenge for all of us, and we hear about that enabling situation when it comes mostly to people in recovery or working with, people who have addiction issues. So, the tough love thing, that when your kid shows up on your doorstep and you need to kick them out and let them know that you can't fund them or support them or be the problem solver to their situation until they learn how to do it themselves. It always feels like, well, that's not me, because I don't have a family member who's out there that way. But in all these other smaller ways, what are we not allowing people to learn, or inhibiting our um the growth of people around us, because it's easier to say, well, I can do this for you because it makes me feel so good to see you, to see this accomplished for you, to see you have this solution. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I feel like, and I ask viewers and listeners, certainly you can relate to this idea. Everybody's had to help somebody, and that person kept requiring that help, even though you pretty much had given all you had to give as far as insight or advice or whatever. And they just wanted to keep coming back and living in that space.
Right. And they keep doing it over and over.
Right. And so does that ever get them out of the space? I mean, if we're talking about really wanting to help them,
No,
it doesn't.
it
So,
doesn't.
it's letting that go.
It's
And then,
it's a hole that's never filled for them. Um, I feel like they don't even appreciate it. They come to expect it.
right. And to be honest with you, why wouldn't they? Especially if that's how we
Yeah.
created our relationship with them. It's a precedent that there's no other way of them being. If this person, if you engaged from the very beginning of this dynamic where you were the person who picked up the check or was, there to let them stay overnight or whatever thing you did out of kindness, and that's all that they knew from you, then that's what the expectation is from them. So it's almost like we set that
Right.
up without
Right.
checking and balancing it along the way.
Absolutely.
So,
And it is real. I think it's really important to understand that this is a co-creation. When we enable and when they take or whatever, it's completely like I couldn't completely blame him. I lapped it up. I couldn't,
right,
I couldn't get enough of it. And it's interesting too, now that, it's been 5 years, it, it was really doing a number on my mental health. I feel like I was not as stable as I normally was. I wasn't as grounded as I normally was. I was always a nervous wreck of what was going to happen with this person. And, even when I would take a trip somewhere, I would feel like, oh my gosh, but what if he needs me? What if something's wrong? That kind of thing. And it's just it's really dysfunctional. And really what it does is it prevents them from moving forward in their own journey,
right,
and
right,
it blocks the person that's helping. It blocks our light because we're sucked into the vortex.
right. You can't
uh,
have everybody else because you're still worrying about this one
yeah,
person.
you're feeling this person all the time. I mean, that's why, boundaries are so huge.
Sure.
But this was of all the enabling I've ever done, and believe me, I've done a lot. This was the one I learned the most because this was affecting the people around me. This was affecting, my mental health, and I feel that he was manipulating me. He was a smart guy, and I think I don't know that well, you probably think he meant to, but I don't know if he was aware enough that he knew he was manipulating me. What do you think?
Yeah, I think maybe not at first, but then when the light bulb goes off, that this is the response that he could get from saying something to you or from, reaching out to you in a certain way. And you then like Pavlovian, like that's your response to jump in and try to help. Um, and this comes down to and maybe this is another whole topic for this conversation, but what it means to be a counselor or a coach or in the clergy when we are helping people. And do we come to this with this idea that we want to save people, that we want to be able to be the ones to say, oh, you got this stuff from me. And, you know, you do we create the situation where we theoretically want them to keep coming back for more of this
Sure.
stuff? So, if you're a life coach and this is how you make your money and you've got a client who is going to, pay you for that time, then uh are you really trying to not, how far does that go? I feel like it's very interesting that you wanted to not keep collecting from him, which might have been a turning point for him to see, oh, I can do all this and not even have to pay for it.
Yeah.
So once he started, kind of being able to access you as a friend, or the boundary became very, very
Blurry.
fluid or unclear, right? Then you became unclear as to what this was yourself. Like if it was a client, you could say, okay, I'm going to talk to you now, but you're on the clock and you're going to pay double. You kind of gave up that experience.
Exactly. Totally. I mean, I don't blame him at all. I know what what I did in that situation. And, I had in my mind, I had to turn it more into a friendship because I had blurred the line. And just to be clear, because I still do this work for a living, I don't blur that line anymore.
True.
Like
Yes, of
that,
course.
I learned that lesson hard. And I'm sure most people who have been, who are counselors or therapists or whatever, have all had at one point in their practice a client who comes in and look, I mean, to be fair, I'm into past life regression, and he had been in many of my lifetimes. And in all of those lifetimes, I was his mother or his nanny. So it makes sense that I had this draw to him and wanting to help him in the way that a mother thinks of her child. But I had to really, you know, like get knocked over the head before I really understood it. And that's really how it works in our lives, right? First, I always quote Oprah. I love this. She says, first God whispers, then God knocks, then God
Yes.
knocks you on your ass. And that's what it really took for me. But I don't regret any of it because I learned so much from
Mhm.
the experience and learned about boundaries and moving forward. And just to, I'd like to talk about another example of enabling and how I was able to turn it around. Unless there was more you wanted to say.
No, no, I think just to acknowledge the fact that, this was probably just knowing you as I do, even though you say you've enabled, having two beautiful children and having a husband who, for the most part, anybody can claim that a love relationship, a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a child has sometimes engaged them in that kind of experience. And you really didn't have it. At that time, there was no frame of reference for you to have given all and engaged in a co-dependent situation, which oftentimes comes as a boyfriend or girlfriend situation, or as a kid who is getting their stuff over on their parent. That's where I've seen it play out, and this was really a first for you.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
I think that made it even more difficult to see for yourself, because it was a very maternal instinct that was kicking in, a helper instinct, a light worker instinct, and you just wanted to make it better. And this person knew how to kind of pull that out and make and exploit it completely. So
Right, right. And yeah, and I mean, I think generally people who enable are pretty kind-hearted people, probably I would guess that a lot of us are natural light workers, natural healers, and we just want to make the world a better place. We want everyone to feel happy. I mean, I do really have that instinct in me, and I know you do too. And it's like, it's not something you can shut off. It's who you are, but it's, learning how to um, mm, you know, not be too extreme the
right,
other way,
and integrate it
and
into.
integrate it. Yeah. So I also wanted to share, with parenting, because I think a lot of us in this generation, um, enable our children, and I'll say it. I think we came from a generation where our parents, not that they neglected us, but it was a very different time period where you kind of had to do things on your own and figure it out. And now I think maybe the pendulum has swung so far the other way that, we make excuses for our kids, and then they sometimes don't fly and go live their lives because we've enabled them for so long that they don't know how.
Mhm.
So I wanted to bring up that my son, he's the baby in the family, and I've always had a very loving mother-son relationship. And I didn't even realize that my daughter's the firstborn, and she's naturally responsible and naturally independent. And so when he came along, and I knew it was my last child, I'm sure I was enabling. I mean, just ask my daughter; she would probably say I was. I was like, whatever, he was just so cute. Like I allowed things to do everything for him. And then, believe it or not, I had a reading where somebody told me that if I didn't start um, having my son be responsible and independent for certain things, that when he would reach his 30s, he was going to really struggle because he wasn't going to know how to do life on his own. So that really hit me, and gosh, that's the last thing I wanted. So as soon as that reading was over, I came home and I said to my son, okay, from now on, you're going to do your own laundry. I'm going to show you how to do your own laundry. And I want to say this was when he was in either the end of middle school or the beginning of high school. And he was like, what? I think I stopped making his lunch at that point. I stopped wanting to be the field trip mom and all of that stuff. And it was really hard. I had to really keep talking to myself because, again, you just want to nurture and take care of. And I'm really glad I did that because he's finishing up his senior year of college and he has a fantastic
Hello again.
internship and he's really on a pathway for a career that he loves. And I'd like to think it was because, one of the reasons was because I stopped babying him.
Well, that's understandable. And I don't even know how my mother even did the same thing for me. And I definitely was a mama's boy, but she did do that. At one point, she showed me how to do the laundry and uh, showed me how to iron, which I hate doing. Um, but then I was like, oh, I can use this. So I was like, okay, I'll do your laundry for you. And then I would start using that
Yeah.
as my own control mechanism. But it's really, you do see when as I get older, what really stuns me is when I have peers who have had kids either grow up through childhood, through adulthood, or are now parenting young adults. It's fascinating to watch that process and to have been in that place of the kid not that long ago, and to have been navigating those relationships with my parents at that time of being an adult and being independent and not allowing myself to be enabled. I think my parents very much enabled a lot of stuff that I have going on that to this day, uh, it's not that
Yeah.
old.
It ultimately, it really doesn't serve them, but it's hard in the moment. I think one of the other issues that parents have is we have this feeling of wanting to be our children's friend. And the reality is, we really can't be their friends until they're like out of the nest. And like, I mean, I'm very close with both of my kids, but when they were younger, I had to drop the hammer a lot. And I think that's what they need. It's almost like if you have pets, you don't even have to have children to understand this. If you have animals, particularly dogs, because they're really, cats kind of do their own thing. But if you have dogs and you don't train them, they freaking walk all over you. I mean, now we're empty nesters and we have this dog Venus, and my husband is totally fine with her sleeping on the bed every night. Well, she literally
Of
puts her
course,
head on our pillow. Like she's like, really crossing the line, not sleeping by our feet, but up. And she's about a 60-pound dog. So like, it doesn't help. Like you can see the bigger picture and you can see that, okay, now she knows, okay, I can sleep here. I'm going to do this every night. Now I'm going to try and do this. Maybe I can do this. So it's always about boundaries,
yeah,
straddling love and boundaries at the same time.
yes,
Um,
and yeah, our need to help too, our own altruism and boundaries, yeah, definitely. And our needs, there is definitely a narcissist quality to wanting to help and to be that person in control and to be that person who helps that other person.
right.
That's very ego satisfying.
True.
Because it makes you feel like you've got purpose, that you're beyond that, and it makes you feel less shallow, maybe because you are able to do it. But ultimately, I have to check on those things as well. Like, do I like that this person comes running to me for this issue all the time?
And that
What,
is true. That
you
is
know,
very true. My teacher, my spiritual teacher that I used to always go to, I used to tell him that everyone in my family would confide in me, would dump on me. And he said to me, and I was explaining it like it was such a burden. And then he said, "Well, what are you getting out of it?"
I
And I
love,
was like, "What do you mean?
I
You
love
know, I
that.
don't want this." He's like, "Yes, you do. You want this because if you didn't want this, you wouldn't keep allowing it, you know? And you do feel on an ego level, it feels really great when people confide in you or people, want to know what your advice or whatever. People need you, you know, but not super healthy.
That's very wise. I always go there. I don't think I have the authority or the experience to kind of ask that question with command, but it's true because the fact is, what I've learned as a person, just as a human being, is that we don't do what we don't want to do. So, I mean, we literally don't. If you didn't want
Yeah.
that to happen, it would not be happening. Period. So, that's a great question, and if you could just be honest with yourself, you don't have to like wallow in the fact that, oh my God, I get this feed from this person coming to me. If you can be honest, and you don't have to tell anybody else, if you can just be honest with yourself, then it helps you move through it. Like, oh, I do get enjoyment from this. It's not
Right,
enjoyment that I want to have long
right,
term, but you have to be able to be honest with yourself that
right.
that's what it is. So
Yeah, that's so true. And I think a lot of times those of us that allow people to enable us can become martyrs. Like,
literally,
like look at, if I didn't do this, they
right?
would
Where
be
would
a
they be?
mess.
Right? Yeah,
Or,
totally.
my son needs me. I have to do it. He needs me, and we're so put upon. But so I think we need to wrap up now. But my final points really on enabling is a couple. One, don't assume, what are you getting out of this? Don't just blame it on the person who's sucking you dry. You're allowing that sucking that to happen, and why are you allowing that to
And
happen?
why?
Good question to ask. And also to remember that truly every one of us is here for our own journey and to heal. And if we keep trying to fix somebody, which is impossible, first of all, it prevents them from being on their path. In fact, if anything, I think it takes them off their path, and it takes us off our own path because we're so wrapped up in them, we're not focusing on us and where we need to be.
Agreed. Yeah, and I would say I would concur with that. I think it's important to want to help people to be able to help themselves, not to be the person that is the one with the solutions, but to help someone develop their own way of creating their own solutions. So,
Yes, yes. So we would love to hear your stories of how you have enabled and how you got through it. Because I think it's very common. I really do.
oh, absolutely, in some way or another, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So please leave us some comments. We really want to hear from you. And
Like, subscribe, do whatever you need to do to engage, so that we can
yes,
keep bringing you this, so that we know you want to experience this content and share with us. So it's a dialogue. That's what we're ultimately looking to
yes,
create.
absolutely. So thank you for joining us today. And oops, there's my cup. As we wrap up another edition of Spilling the
Spirituality.
Spirituality. And join us next week. We'll have another interesting topic.
All right. Bye.